Welcome to the Relationship Recovery Podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way.
So today I have with us Paul Colaianni, who is the founder of the Love and Abuse podcast, as well as the Overwhelmed Brain podcast. Paul has created a resource called the Mean Workbook, which helps you identify and understand the level of manipulation and abuse in your relationship. Hi, Paul.
Hello. Good to be here, Jessica. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. And Paul, I just want to make sure this is clear. You're a behavior and relationship coach outside of running the podcast, right?
I have gone through several iterations of the title, but yes.
Okay. Yeah.
That is
you
what
work with individuals. Yeah.
I used to do one-on-one coaching, and now I do one-to-many. So that's on the podcast. And like you said, the Mean Workbook.
Yeah.
And now I also have programs and stuff like that too. So I have worked with many, many clients as a behavior and relationship coach. So yes, I still call myself that. That's an appropriate title.
Okay. Awesome. So Paul, I have listened to almost every episode of your podcast, Love and Abuse. And I also have purchased the Mean Workbook. At the time, my score was a 143. And then the second time I took it, when I was a little more honest with myself, it was a 168. And both of those fall in the highly abusive category.
That's out of 200 points, just so anyone listening. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to create the workbook?
Oh, yeah. Well, I do have a small backstory to share. I grew up in an alcoholic household, and so I developed all these terrible coping mechanisms and survival skills, thinking that that's how I'm supposed to operate and survive in the world. And then when I grew up and got into my first real relationship as a teenager, these old coping and survival mechanisms kicked in, and I was critical and judgmental and possessive and jealous and all these bad behaviors that I now see, but I did not see or understand then. And I thought that's the way I'm supposed to be. So I went through like 3 or 4 really major relationships in my life where I did these behaviors. And then I got married and I met the woman. I thought, this is it. You know, once you're married, it's forever and everything's going to be wonderful, happily ever after. And so when my marriage ended, or it was starting to end, she wanted to separate and find herself again because she was becoming depressed and losing her passion for life. And I ended up being alone for a while. And while I was alone, while she left, because our plan was to get back together, while I was alone, I realized how bad, how awful I was being to her. There was something that kicked in where I put her shoes on, and I finally developed some empathy, which I thought I had, but apparently not enough to know that I was hurting someone else. And I realized, oh my God, if I was her, I would feel awful about how I treated that person, me, her, or whatever. And for the first time ever, I realized I'm hurting her and this is terrible. And our relationship is ending. And no wonder she's becoming depressed and losing her passion for life, is because I'm treating her this way. And I just felt sick to my stomach. I don't know what happened in that moment, but I realized that I was the problem. I was the common denominator for my entire miserable life of, good relationships, but all the failures that I created. So I decided that in that moment that I needed to change who I was. And this was, I don't know, probably over a decade ago. And I said, this is it. I cannot be this person anymore. Now, my wife had already fallen out of love with me. She was done. And it was painful. And I was, like everyone else, let's just work this out. Can we go to therapy? And she was done. And from that point on, I decided that I needed to work on myself. So it has been, long story short, it has been a healing process from that day forward, and starting to focus on myself instead of other people, starting to heal myself instead of changing other people to accommodate me and do what I want them to do. And that, it just made me real. I started seeing all these behaviors that I used to do and understanding or starting to understand why I was so triggered all the time and why I was possessive and jealous and critical and judgmental. all these things started just showing up in my life as far as how they are affecting my life. And I also started seeing it in other people and other relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And around that time, actually, before I got divorced, I trained in coaching and I started studying a lot of psychological stuff way before this, but I had a lot of background. And so I added this background on my study into where I am today, which is building up into, like you asked, the mean workbook. Why did I create this mean workbook? I created it because I learned so much that relationships can be so much better, so much easier. And a lot of people, some of them, but there's a segment of people that know they're hurtful and won't stop. And then there's a segment of people that don't understand that they're hurtful or don't know they're hurtful and don't think they have to stop. And I think I fall into the latter somewhat more often than the other one. But I really think I needed to share this information with people and give people like anyone who's been in a terrible relationship, people like that need something that says this is abusive behavior.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what you said. You said I was in a bad relationship and I got this score, which is basically checking off, yes, this is it. Yes, this is true. Yes, this is true. And when you get that score, you realize, oh, all of this stuff is happening. I guess it is serious. I guess I do have to take it seriously. And this isn't getting any better. So long story again, but that's basically where I was and how I got to the point where I think I needed to create this so other people didn't fall into the trap of either being in the abusive relationship or being the abuser themselves. So I kind of have that perspective of being the emotional abuser, coming into a place of, oh crap, I'm a really terrible person. That's how I felt back then. I'm doing terrible things. I need to change this. And so now I have, like you said, the podcast and the workbook.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I was going to ask about your story and what got you into this work, because people usually come into this work when they have a history with it in some way, and an understanding of it. I sometimes I think about like how somebody with no understanding of emotional abuse, like they didn't go through it, they didn't experience it, like how they would be able to be compassionate to those on the inside when they're saying like, I can't leave and I can't break away, because sometimes it could be so hard. But something that your workbook helped me with that. And I was deep in the weeds of trying to figure out if I was in an emotionally abusive relationship and in complete denial that it was real abuse. I grew up in an abusive home, and I definitely have elements of abuse in my marriage, or my former marriage. And I just was I think I just did not want to see it again in another relationship and be like, I'm here again. But when I finally bought your workbook, I remember I decided that I was going to listen to myself for once. Like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to go through it. And you had a comment in there in like the intro that said, don't think, like, it's almost said like, don't think so hard about it. If you're reading it and it's present, just mark it as yes and move on. So not like, oh, does he do this sometimes? Or it only happened once. Like, it was an invitation to not get stuck, in that mental cycle. And I mean, after I did that, I still struggled, but that helped me just be like, okay, I just went through 200 items, and there were so many threads, and he wasn't seeing it, like you said, you got to that point where you were seeing it and you were like, oh my God. And this happened while you were alone. And then you made a choice to change. And I have to imagine that changing was really difficult for you, like to go from the natural behaviors that you had to forming new behaviors.
It was extremely, I don't want to say difficult, but it's a great word for it, because, excuse me, when I started changing, when I remember the very first change I made, like one of the issues I had with when I was married, and probably throughout all my relationships, was I had this ideal partner in my mind, and any of my partners never met that ideal place. So I had this huge high bar of perfection that she needed to be. And of course, everyone's going to fail that because no one's perfect. And even if they get to that point where they satisfy everything, I'm going to find something else, or at least the abuser is going to find something else. And so I remember when I decided that this is a terrible way to be, I am the problem, not her. I decided that I'm going to start doing the opposite of what I used to do. If I used to be upset that she would spend more time with friends and family, which it's silly, that's a silly thing I think about now, but that's who I was. I'm upset that she's spending more time with friends and family. What can I do that's the opposite? And I said, I'm going to support her and tell her, hey, why don't you go spend some time with friends or family? And I started changing that around, even though it was difficult because I was still in survival mode. I was still not able to comprehend everything that was going on with me, but I knew I had to change. I just had no choice. And so that's what I started doing as my marriage was going to end anyway. The love from her heart was gone. But this is the path I took. I just started shifting gears. And that shift was very difficult because I would still get emotionally triggered in different ways and sometimes small ways. And typically when you're emotionally triggered, you're angered by something, you see somebody doing something you don't want them to do. So you want to say something or change what they're doing, help them change what they're doing or cause them to change. And I decided that I have to stop doing that. I have to start focusing. I have to start focusing on myself and not her. And that's like another thing I teach in another program is that when the emotional abuser, when they get triggered, they automatically, most of the time, focus on the other person.
Yeah.
I'm going to focus on you because I want to manipulate you. I want to control you. I want to make you feel guilty. I want to make you feel responsible for everything that's going wrong in the relationship. I want to control this person so that I don't have to deal with my own emotional state and I don't have to worry about changing myself. And so shifting from that, that's who I was all my life.
Yeah.
Shifting from that focused on someone else, changing my environment, changing other people, to shift it around and focus on myself. Yes, difficult, complex, and baby steps. And each time I got emotionally triggered, it was effort. So yes, the answer to your question, it was definitely difficult. I'm thinking that it's probably more complex than difficult, but both words apply.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think about that a lot because Lundy Bancroft in his book, Why Does He Do That? The mind of a angry and controlling man. Yes. He talks about how difficult it is for somebody to change because they would have to change the way that they think. And I work with healthy people in my other businesses. I work with millennial women going through like quarter life changes.
Wow.
That's how great. I started coaching before I naturally found my way here. But I think often about those women that I work with and how hard it is for somebody who wants to change to make the changes. And now, you were somebody who wanted to change and it was, you had to sit through all the discomfort of forming these new habits. And it's even harder for somebody who doesn't want to change and is probably in complete denial of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you touched on your other program, and I believe it's called so on your website, it's I Am the Abuser, but what is the name of the program?
Yeah. On the loveandabuse.com website, there is a link at the top that says I Am the Abuser. So I'm talking to the people that have discovered they're emotionally abusive and they want to change that, or they're interested in maybe learning about their own behavior. Maybe they were called emotionally abusive and they don't believe it, so they want to learn about it, or they do believe it and they want to learn about it. So they click on that, and the program is called Healed Being.
Healed Being, right? Yes. What have you noticed is the hardest part for people that are in the Healed Being program?
Oh yeah, that's an easy one because I just explained it. It's the it's the focus thing. It's like that because that's what happens. They get triggered and they want to change someone else. That's the immediate reaction to the emotional abuser is the emotional trigger that happens. What's an emotional trigger? Typically the other person, and this can be in any relationship, but typically romantic relationship, sometimes family, but mostly the people that go in there are in romantic relationships, or they're trying to save a romantic relationship. but the emotional trigger will occur because the other person will do something that upsets them. And it could be something stupid. It could be something mundane. It could be something benign. The dishes aren't stacked right. It upsets them. And now they're hearing a quote dish load, no pun intended, of abusive behavior. And it doesn't even have to be like verbal abuse. It could just be a slight guilt trip.
Yeah.
Like, I thought we talked about this. Like, why are you talking to me like this? This is not an equal partner talking to me. This is like a parent chastising a child. So tiny little behaviors like that start to drip feed into the relationship and start to disintegrate the relationship itself. I forget the question you just asked me. What did you say?
I said, oh, you answered it, but it was, what is the hardest, what is the piece that you find hardest for those who go through the Healed Being program?
Yeah. And let me finish that answer. So the people that are in the program now, they'll tell me, it's so hard because I want to say this or do this. And one of my lessons one of the early lessons is on focus. And it really does, it's really about attention too. Like, where is your focus? Where is your attention? And if if anybody listening to this thinks they have any type of emotionally damaging, hurtful, or abusive behavior, you can tell when it happens. Like, you get emotionally triggered, you get upset, you get sad, you immediately want to change or control the other person. Now, that doesn't always mean it's abusive or hurtful, but you can tell in your mind that your focus immediately goes to them, saying, I want them to do something. In your mind, I want them to do something differently. The tricky part is the victim also feels this too, right?
Yeah.
The victim of abuse will say, I want them to do something differently.
Yeah.
But the abuser will do that. The abuser will move forward thinking, I'm right, they're wrong, and I'm going to make sure that the victim is going to comply with what I want. And if they don't do it directly, I'll do it indirectly through guilt trips, through subtle manipulations or gaslighting and things like that. So yes, the most, at least one of the more difficult parts of it is when the emotional abuser gets triggered. And that's a difficult part in itself, trying to heal from their triggers, which I also address. But once they do get triggered, how do I take my focus off the other person and then come back to myself and say, the problem is not them, it's me. The problem is not them not doing what I want. It's me accepting them doing what they want. And so I have to, if I'm the abuser, I have to learn to realize that if I don't like what they're doing, that's my problem, not theirs. And so it's really, like you said, they have to think differently.
Yeah.
In the program, I say, you have to become someone you're not. You really do, because that hasn't been you for most of your life. And so to change that is tricky.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, so you just said they have to realize that they have to begin to say to themselves, the problem is not them, it's me. And
Yes.
In my past relationship, he would say that, it's me, I get it, it's me, it's always me, right? Which is kind of like frustrating. But then, it would turn, shortly after that, it would say, yep, it's always me, it's never you. And it was just such a clue to me that, like, if he wasn't going to change, or if he was, it wasn't going to be while I was around.
Because it's interesting. I interject?
Yeah, of course.
It's interesting, that scenario you described, because this is what happens. The emotional abuser will use all the learning tools and resources that you are learning about yourself and empowering yourself against you. So they're saying, like, your ex is saying, yeah, it's me, it's always me. But that, to me, is the abusive behavior coming out in a way to guilt you. So there, the victim of abuse will often say, it must be me. I must be doing this problem. And the victim of abuse will feel bad about it. And then they'll try to fix that or improve themselves or try to show up differently in the relationship. They want to do something different so that the other person is happy, or the victim thinks that they're doing something wrong and they want to change that. They don't want to do anything wrong. They're actually humble, empathetic, and try to change. Typically, they want to change so that they don't show up this way. Whereas the abuser who says, okay, it's always me. Yeah, it's always me. They're trying to guilt you, and they're not being empathetic at all. They're not trying to change because, like you'll probably tell me, your partner was a male.
Yes.
I just have to, I have to make sure I get the pronouns right here. But he will do that behavior to make you feel guilty and not go inward and think, oh, maybe I am doing something wrong. And he probably, like, I hope you're going to tell me, you'll reveal in a second, repeated that behavior over and over again.
Yeah, I had 100 examples of it, and in healing, like, I think I started to understand all, like, the level of abuse and what was happening maybe around April of 2021. And I don't think that I really broke away until, or fully, like, within myself and, in terms of contact, probably till December. We actually broke up in August, but I emailed you, I think in November. And I remember, and I actually read through it yesterday. I have some of the examples in front of me. It was almost like that. What you just described was almost every example. So I'm just going to go ahead and read through some of them.
Sure.
All right. So, and I actually put this in the email that I wrote to you, and I'll go through like 5 or 6 of them because I included a whole bunch, but
sure.
So here are some examples that I listed. I looked tired while cleaning up the kitchen. He claimed I was mad at him for not helping. This led to a 4-hour fight of me saying I'm not mad and him screaming at me. I had a period of getting a lot of headaches last winter, and he told me there's always something wrong with you. He'd invite me to hang out with friends, specifically all girls. We'd have a good time. He'd thank me after for coming. And in a fight a few days later would say, notice I was the only one with a girlfriend there. He'd agree to do something over and over, and I'd question if he actually wants to. He'd agree again and then blame me for overscheduling things. He'd blame me when he did something wrong. One time I got to his house for a date night and he was asleep. I sat down, I responded to emails on my phone and told him just to get ready. He told me I was mad. I wasn't. I just wanted to go out, and that led to a 4-hour fight about how I looked mad but wasn't saying I was mad. He told me I'm the neediest person he ever met, which I'm not. I've lived alone since I was 16. I'm a single mom. He told me I'm the saddest person he's ever met, and he doesn't want to be with somebody with depression, but struggles with it himself. He told his family 3 weeks ago he was suicidal when they were pushing him to talk through whatever was going on with him, but then dropped that a few days later. So in my experience, like, that was probably actually one of the first things that I was able to pick up on, was that every time he had there was a discomfort within him, it was my fault. And this, these were some larger examples, but some of the tiny ones, like the day-to-day ones, where he's overwhelmed, so he can't check in with me. It's like, if I do, then, it's not okay. One that actually came up a lot was he was very behind on his own stuff. Like, he was very behind on his work, on his workouts, on his life. And I was the type of person that I would take clients once my child went to bed, and I would still stay up working sometimes because I'm not paying for childcare. And regardless, I've done this my whole life, but he would tell me that I need to rest. And I'm like, but this is what I do. This allows me to go to the gym in the morning. And then over time, he would always harp on that. And I started to realize, I think that he feels bad or guilty because he's playing video games and I'm up working, trying to figure things out, making progress. But it always came back to you need to rest. That's your problem. And I'm like, what? And
you need to rest. That's your problem.
Yeah.
What was he referring to? Did he see you that you were just working your butt off doing something, or what?
I think it was more so that I think I was up working almost every night, but that, like I said, that was my schedule. That allowed me to have some more breaks during the day. I wasn't staying up super late, but I think it was, you know, I started to feel like because his nights weren't spent productive, like it's almost like the day ended at 4 p.m. for him, that he felt guilty if we were like texting and he's playing video games and I'm writing a blog post or something. But it came up in every argument about like how I'm doing too much when I never thought I was doing too much. I thought what I was doing was enough. I mean, I do more now, so I wonder what he would say now, but I feel like in almost all the examples, it was like, you know, it, he felt guilty, but then had to make me feel bad.
Right. And that's what I was going to say, is that it sounds like he wanted to make it okay to sit around and play video games and not work. And I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that in moderation, but if that's his guilt kicking in, and if he thinks that you're okay taking a rest, then he'll think that you're okay with him taking a rest. Or he can say, hey, we're all allowed to take breaks, and use that because he said, because he said that you should take a break. And yeah, I think you're right. You're probably spot on there.
Yeah. The kitchen example where I got up, I cleaned the kitchen. It's actually, that one was probably one of the first ones. And I just remember like I was getting a headache because it was during this headache time. And I was like, all right, I'm going to go clean the kitchen. We had made dinner, whatever. And I wanted to put everything away. And I got up and did it. I didn't ask for help. And it's like, it was his guilt. Like he probably felt bad for not getting up and helping me. I didn't care. It's my kitchen. We were also newly dating. It was probably 4 months in, and I just wanted to kind of like get it done so I could go to bed after whatever show we were watching was over. And then like next thing I know, I'm up until 2 a.m. having this argument. And I'm just like, I never said I was mad, and I'm just sitting there like, am I nuts? Like I
Right.
literally
This is like 4 months.
yeah. Like I never said I was mad. So I actually close out this email saying, I feel so crazy and so trapped. I can't do or say anything. He doesn't think he's doing anything wrong. He thinks that I'm the problem. I'm reminded every time, but it feels so hard to not be able to say anything at all, but also be unable to engage because that's the only safe thing that I can do. I know I can't even tell him I can't talk anymore. I can't even ask for space. He'll turn it around and tell me I'm just angry that he's on a work trip or something ridiculous that isn't true. I don't know if you can offer any support, but the space between crying and anger is really hard. And when I reread that last line, the space between crying and anger is really hard, kind of brought me right back to that place I was like being so mad at like what things that have happened, being so mad at some of these incidents, being so mad that I was arguing over like not being angry. And then, but also like how sad it was to have to like grieve the idea of a person that didn't exist anymore.
Yourself, you mean?
No, him. No, like
him.
the him that I had.
Him. Well, yeah, I could look at it both ways. You disintegrating while he's the person changing in front of your eyes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think so. Love bombing has become such a buzzword. And so I don't know if there's another way that you can frame it, but like that beginning of the relationship when the first little while where everything just feels good and they're attractive and they're doing all the things that you want them to do. It's like, I think I tried for that whole relationship to get back to that feeling. And I had to grieve like I've created a person that doesn't exist based off of what I saw from him. And I have to see the reality of the person that is actually here.
I mean, that's a great way to put it. I would look at it as you didn't create the person that didn't exist because that person did exist in the beginning. Mm-hmm. That was the person you saw. You just thought he was showing his true colors then. And then he changed. Now, that doesn't mean he changed. He could have always been that way. And the colors, he probably was always this way. And the colors he showed you in the beginning were part of what I might even call the grooming process. grooming you to be comfortable and fall in love and feel good around him and feel safe and feel warm and supported and trusted. All these wonderful feelings that a healthy relationship should have. But then he now wants to get away with bad behavior, manipulation and control and making you feel bad and having power over you. And so that shift that takes place is him realizing you're locked in, like you are now bonded. And if you've heard the term trauma bond, you are now traumatically bonded, because what's going to happen is you are now more resilient to his bad behavior.
Yeah.
Because you are more likely to give him the benefit of the doubt and a second chance and a third chance and a 300th chance. And this will be the up and down cycle for your relationship from now on. And because of that, like you said it perfectly. I was looking for that person that I fell in love with, that person that was there before. And he tricked you in a way, but whether he did that consciously or unconsciously, he knows that these people show up. A lot of these people show up as the most supporting, most loving, most caring people. And you just love that. And then when they shift, this is an opportunity for, and a lot of people don't know this because they haven't experienced this before, or they don't think they're being deceived. But there's an opportunity when the first bad behavior comes out to address it right away. Like, whoa, what just happened here? The victim of emotional abuse, I'm not blaming the victim here, but what ends up happening is they continue being the victim because they continue having this, I don't know, empathy, sympathy, and so much love for the other person that they keep giving them chances. And again, that's not the victim's fault. But if you're aware of when the abuse or the bad behavior or the first hurtful action starts, and you don't let it go, and you say, we need to address this so it doesn't get any worse, then you might be able to tackle it. At the same time, I realize there are very crafty people out there, and they know how to turn it around and put it back on you and say, well, no, because you did this, and this is you, and this is your fault, and this is why, and this is probably what you experienced, Jessica, the whole time, that you felt like it was my fault. So maybe I do need to look inward, because you're a compassionate person, I'm going to guess. You probably are kind and caring and supportive, and you want to do the best. But they make you think that you're at fault. So you look inward because you don't want to show up as a bad, hurtful person.
Yeah. And for me, I didn't have good examples of love in my life. I had verbal and physical abuse when I was a child. And then I definitely had my string of toxic relationships after that. And I guess there were things that I normalized that weren't normal, that in healing and working through the trauma bond, I was able to uncover and come to terms with and question. But I hear from a lot of my clients that, when the first sign of something happens, if I'm talking to somebody and I hear something, my ears do pop up now, but I think when you're in it, they don't. And, I'll hear clients say I'm just asking for too much, and that's almost like a little bit of a red flag for me when I hear that, because it's if you're asking for what you need, or if someone's telling you that you're asking for too much, and they're not seeing it as, wait, am I being told, are my needs being denied? And so how would you frame it if somebody said to you, I don't know if it's abusive or not. I have no idea. How can I spot it? And most likely they're probably past the first incident, but what would you say if somebody, they have normalized it and they don't even realize it?
Oh, you mean as far as, am I the abusive one? Am I the one causing the problem? Am I the one that actually, maybe they're right about me?
Well, I think it goes next. That's right in line with am I too sensitive?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Am I the problem? Am I asking for too much? Am I putting too much on him? Those types.
Yeah. I think a simple test, maybe it's not that simple, but it's at least a thought experiment for now, is when my partner or somebody says that I'm the problem, like, let me test you, Jessica. If I said, Jessica, this interview, you're being emotionally abusive to me right now. Where do you go in your mind with that?
Am I?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. Am I?
I know, like you said that, and I like sat up in my seat. I think I'm just like, it's like so not, I'm like so afraid of ever being that. But yeah, it's like, am I? Did I do that?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I have this on my little notepad on my screen. It said, this is the answer to that question. Am I? Like,
Hmm.
uh, oh crap, I don't want to be. That's where I go.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be. If I am, I need to change that, or I need to figure this out. I'm so sorry. I mean, that's where I go. If somebody said that to me, whoa, I'm so sorry. What's going on here? I got to figure this out. And so the typically what happens is the abuser, if I said that to an abuser, hey, you're being emotionally abusive right now, they're more likely going to say, I'm not being abusive, you are.
Yeah.
They immediately don't think about it. They don't reflect. They don't feel any compassion or empathy. I mean, a lot of them, some of them do, some of them figure this stuff out. But in general, when they've been doing it for so long, they will not dive into that reflection space like you just did.
Yeah.
I think that's a quick test.
Yeah. No, I think that's really helpful because a lot of my clients, their partners will claim that they're the abusive one, or if they try
Yes.
and raise an issue, it's quickly turned around. And you talk about this a lot on your podcast about the turnaround game, which I'm going to ask you to explain in a second.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think that tool is really helpful is that that's a tool that somebody can use in the moment. If they're trying to express something to someone and their first answer is, no, you do this.
Right.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the things that helped me the most is I was like, this continuously happens, like I'm sitting here doing all this personal work. I have 2 therapists, like, I'm like, I'm reading every book. I'm driving myself crazy, and he's doing nothing because he doesn't think that anything's wrong. And
Yeah.
that comes up in probably every story of the clients that I work with, but that's really, I think that's really good. I always tell clients this too. It's like, if they're coming to me, to work on something or to work on themselves, like they are most likely not the abusive one because they're seeing that there's a problem and they want to work on it and they want to like identify things within the relationship and also within themselves.
That's right in line with the reflection, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly, I echo the same sentiment when people reach out to me and they ask that question, which I hear a lot. I don't know if I am the abusive one. And I'm almost always return and say, usually the abusive one doesn't say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't know if I am. Now, the abusive one that starts to learn about themselves and realize, well, maybe I am being abusive, they will start to think that way. But that shift has to take place first. Typically, what you're talking about, and what I talk about a lot, is the abuser that continues to abuse, isn't reflective, isn't empathetic, puts everything, like you said, the turnaround game, which I can talk about, puts everything on the other person. No, it's you. Excuse me. You're too sensitive. Um, you're angry. Redefining your reality, like you said. You're just angry. You're just tired. Putting all that on you, because what does that do? Talking about focus again, it causes you to focus on yourself. So when your focus is on yourself, that's the turnaround game. And the turnaround is the abuser does not want the focus on them, because then they'll have to explain themselves if you start getting close to their truth. Their truth could be some fear or something else that they don't want you to know about them because it makes them too vulnerable. And their vulnerability turns into outward anger or outward upset or outward manipulation and guilting and pushing everything back on you. So that's what I call the turnaround game, is that I, as the abuser playing this role right now, I don't want any of this stress on me because I have terrible coping mechanisms. The abuser doesn't think like this, but using this as an example, this is what's happening. The abuser doesn't have a good coping mechanism, doesn't know how to express themselves healthily, in a healthy way, and will anything that comes to them that stresses them out, it's going to be pushed onto someone else and turned back on you. So if you are the victim of abuse and you're saying, look, what you're doing is hurting me, and the abuser goes, I'm hurting you, you're hurting me, and this is what you're doing. And then they have 10 things like this and this, and what about that time and this and this, and they push it all back on you because you're empathetic, you're going to say, wow, I really don't want to hurt that person, so I better reflect on this and keep it in me so I can think about this stuff, or get into a 4-hour argument trying to defend yourself because you're not ready to go into that space because you're right, but then you lose the argument because you're tired, you're just sick of arguing. I wouldn't say lose the argument, but it just doesn't go anywhere.
I've lost a lot of arguments being tired. Yeah. That's a really good point.
Fine, you're right. I just don't want to argue anymore. I know that feeling.
Yeah.
So when the abuser turns it around and pushes it back on the victim, the abuser walks away scot-free.
Yeah.
Like, no, I don't have to think about it anymore. And they're not going to blame me anymore because I pushed it back on them and I made them think about their own actions. And as long as they're dealing with themselves, they're not going to look at me. The spotlight's no longer on me. Hooray. Now I can go play video games or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that describes what happens really, really well. And you're right. Like, I know I said lost a lot of arguments to being tired, but it was like, I just got tired of explaining myself a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I got tired of having conversations, and I got tired of, eventually I got tired of putting up with it. Once I started to feel like a bit better and a bit more aligned, that's when I started to push back a bit more.
Yeah.
But I think overall, like, we do get, at this point, if you're losing arguments from losing in air quotes of being tired, you're probably also deep in the relationship at this point, or deep in the trauma bond, and you touched on that earlier. And one of the things that I had to learn was that I kept calling certain things love, and I had to start replacing that word love with trauma bonded. Every time, like, I would catch myself, being like, I love him so much. Like, I'd be like, no, I am so trauma bonded right now.
That's smart. It's like an affirmation or a declaration in a way that really empowers you and tells you the truth instead of what you hope. It's almost like a trauma bond, in case somebody's listening and don't know what that is. I look at it as sort of a drug where you fall in love with somebody, you're really attached to them, you have this strong bond, and then they hurt you, and then you want to change that, and you don't want to hurt them because that's what you think. You think you hurt them, so they hurt you back often. And then so you in this down state. But when things are great, you're in this up state and you love and you're happy because they're so nice, and that's who they really are. That's what's in your mind. That's who they really are. And so then they hurt you again. And now you're in this down state. And so this traumatic bond, and the name of my show, between love and abuse is, I can't have love without this abuse, but at least when I have the love, it's amazing. But when I have the abuse, it's terrible. And the trauma bond part is, the abuse is always in the back of your mind. Like, I don't want it to happen again. I hope this time it has changed. And then it gets loving and happy and joyful again. And you think, okay, maybe this is it. Maybe this will be the way it is from now on. Maybe they've learned. Maybe they understand now that they're really hurting me and they don't want to do that anymore. And so you look for those highs in the midst of all these lows, and it's like a drug. You become addicted to it. Like, okay, I'm in the low, but I know the high is coming. I want that high again, so I'm going to work very hard to get it. Here it comes, and it fills a lot of sometimes unmet needs from childhood. Like, you went through that toxic childhood where you were being abused, and boy, talk about unmet needs. I mean, so unfair as a child to go through that and have no coping skills. You just have to learn how to survive, and you took those survival skills, and now you are getting into these bad relationships that are hurting you. And like you said, you've normalized it. And so now you're not even sure what's real and what's good and what's healthy. And then you get into the trauma bond, the traumatic bonding with somebody that hurts you and loves you. Well, that's not really love, but hurts you and makes you feel wonderful and giddy sometimes. And then you are in that sort of, I'm high and then I'm withdrawing. I'm high and then I'm withdrawing. It's like that's why I call it like a drug. It's like an addiction almost. I don't know if you felt that. Do Do you think that's a good description of that, or do you have another one?
Yeah, I definitely feel like love addiction felt that felt very true for me. And I did read a lot of resources on love addiction when I was going through it. I think that, I mean, I got addicted to the highs. I think I
Yeah.
got addicted to the reconciliation, actually. Like in the cycle of abuse, it goes from like calm to tension building to the incident, and then the reconciliation. I think I got really just like, I got addicted to that, like the days after that, when things were different, or I had the hope that things would change. I couldn't break out of it. And I would ruminate about it. I would spend a lot of time thinking about it and reading about it and trying to figure it all out. And that was one of the hardest things to break. And not contacting him was even harder. It was like, I would check his like Instagram, status. I would check, if I got messages from him. I would block and then unblock. And it was really hard for me. And it felt like an addiction. And my friends would call it out and say, "You're acting like an addict." And I would say, "That's what it feels like. Like, that is what it feels like. I feel like I'm doing something wrong by shutting him out, until it started to feel okay. Like over time, by having really strict rules with myself, I lessened that pull, but I had to treat it as if, like as if it was an addiction, like as if I was trying to not drink or
Yeah.
not drug or something.
That can be hard to break. That can be hard. One of the tricks that I've learned, I mean, because that's really what I would call obsessive behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Not to insult anybody, but that is really obsessive thinking. You're constantly obsessing about them. If you're broken up, you're looking at their social media, you're wondering if they're going to call you, you're obsessing. I better keep my phone on ring because if I don't hear it, I'll miss the call. It's just obsessive thinking. I talk about that in the Overwhelmed Brain.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to hear episodes, I talked about that, but very important to understand that's obsessive thinking. And one of the ways, or at least one of the steps towards getting out of obsessive thinking is to address what you hope, because a lot of people hold on to the hope that something is true. And so as long as you have hope, then you make stuff up that you hope will come true. And so how do you address that? And I do this with myself sometimes. If I'm obsessing about something, I'll ask myself the question, especially when it comes to, should I do this or should I not? Or is this good for me? Is this not? I think it's two things, actually. Am I more happy than I am upset? Like, let's just say it's a relationship. Am I more happy than I am upset more of the time? So am I happy over 50% of the time? Most abusive relationships, it's never half and half. It's usually I'm happy 5% of the time or 15% of the time, but the rest of the time I'm ruminating and thinking about all this stuff. And if you are happy more often than not, then yeah, maybe there's a chance. Maybe you can work things out. Maybe they are willing to listen and talk through things. In a situation you're talking about, maybe your own relationship, then I might pose a question like, if I promised you that that person would never, ever change and that it would be this way for the rest of your life together, how does that make you feel? And I'm not asking that right now, but that is the question that I would ask, because most people are going to say, well, I don't want it to be this way for the rest of my life. I'm hoping this other person changes, but I'm promising you he won't. I'm promising it. I guarantee you, I've been to the future. I've seen it. So I put you in a state of mind of taking away hope. And that sounds terrible. I mean, but I have to take away hope when you're hoping for something different when it's something harmful. I mean, there's a difference. Like you lost your animal, like your dog. You have a dog, or you have a dog story. I know you do. You told me about it.
Yeah.
So let's just say your dog ran away.
Yeah.
It's great to have hope. I hope he comes back. I'm going to put up signs. That hope keeps you going. But to have hope in an abusive relationship, yes, it's nice to hope that that other person changes, but it's also important to commit to the fact. I mean, you have to make it a fact in your mind that the person will never change. And it's okay if you're wrong about that fact. And I think that's the most important part, is that you can have hope that the person will change, but just make it a fact in your mind that that person will never change. Because if you do that, then you start making different decisions. Then you start you start realizing, well, if I know that person will never change, then this is what I'm going to do instead. I don't have to worry about keeping my phone on all night. I don't have to worry about looking at social because I know he's not going to change, or they or she. And when you do that, when you take that step, then you start letting go of the obsession. And the obsession lets go of you, and you can feel different. And this is the thing, is that if you're wrong, what if I'm wrong? What if he does change? Or what if they do change? Then you can just say, okay, great. Now let's talk at this from a different place. Because if they do change, they're probably going to say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I just realized how much I hurt you. I just realized it. And I need to reflect on this stuff. And it's a good thing you left. It's a good thing that you decided to take a step for yourself and protect yourself, because I was dangerous. Most abusers will not do that, but some will get to that point if they're on a healing path.
Yeah.
If they get to that point, then great, I was wrong about them. And that's even better. Just a surprise.
Yeah. That is the place I eventually got to. The only caveat to it was that I realized that if he was to change, it was going to take years. It would take years, and I didn't want to be around for it. Like, I was like,
that was smart of you.
I don't want to be around for this. I'm a single mom too, but she was 4 then. She's 5 now. And I was like, that's not what I want for myself. Like, I was doing a lot of work keeping them separate too. And I wanted, like, that wasn't the life I wanted in the next 5 years. I wanted to be able to be with somebody who I would want to be around her, and also that I could grow a family with. Like, I couldn't do that with this person. And so once I started to break the trauma bond, it was like, I think I did tell myself he was never going to change. But if he did, it was going to take so long. And I wasn't willing to lose that much of me in the meantime.
Very smart. Yeah, you did the right thing, as far as, like, even if you were wrong, even if it didn't take years, it only took weeks. Let's just say he just had epiphany.
Yeah.
Or the hand of God or whatever touched him, and he suddenly had all these thoughts, whatever. Great. That's great. He reaches out, and if you're ready to talk, then you can reconnect if you want. If you have moved on, then you can say, no, I'm okay. And somebody who loves you is going to say, okay, I support your path. If you don't want to reconnect, then I support that, because I care about you and I want you to be happy. That is healthy. That's healthy love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I actually will share what happened when he reached back out, and we can sort of wrap up there.
Sure.
And for anybody listening, I have been wanting to talk about the dog story that Paul mentioned. I will do that at a later time though, because it's very long. But Paul's community that he has helped me kind of break down some of the things about the dog, but I will also talk about that whenever I have that episode. But so he did come back. And so I'm not somebody who likes her birthday. My birthday was never valued when I was younger. So it's not something that, like, I grew up celebrating. It's probably something I grew up resenting. And, and I was also, like, I've been a single parent since my daughter was 1. So there's been a lot of times of me just, on my birthday, it's like literally just another day. And I mean, anyone who knows me knows that, I'm never going to host a party. I'm not going to do anything. And he knew that too, because he was with me for 2 of them. And so he reached back out 2 days before my birthday. And I see an email, and it looked like a used car salesman. It was like, hey, Jessica, just wondering if I could have a few minutes of your time this week. And this is after, like, no contact for 4 months.
That's weird.
Yeah. Just, like, let me know, and then signed his name. And I was like, what? Like, what is this about? And then I wrote back, what is this about? And I was thinking, shit, he's coming for the dog. And then he responds with, like, 1, I want to share a funny story about something that happened on Cape Cod. 2, just wondering how you're doing. And 3, I know it's your birthday coming up. And I was just like, and my body went into fight, flight, freeze, like, all at once. And I just was like, no, like, the inner no was so loud.
Oh, good.
And I just said, I waited a bit, and I replied and said, I'm not interested in talking. And that was it.
Good.
So then 2 weeks later, I go to walk the dog with my daughter, and we walk outside. It's cold out. It's March. And everything that he had left of mine, including shared gifts and, like, cleaning supplies and stuff for the dog were left in garbage bags in the vestibule of my apartment with my name on a Post-it. And my daughter's like, is that your stuff? And I'm like, holy shit. Like, and I asked him to throw all of it out. I had taken the stuff that I wanted like a while back. I didn't want any of that. And like, I also don't want gifts back, like that felt really manipulative. And so that made me really angry. And I wrote him an email and I said, you are like, I left out the fact that he still left a gift for my birthday after I said I didn't want to talk. And I just never reached out after that. So then this happens and I reach out and I say, like, do not come to my apartment again. This was insanely inappropriate. Like Charlotte did not need to see that. And there's a better way this could have been handled. I also asked you to just throw it out. I requested that. And it went to a few back and forth emails. And the last one, he had copied and pasted the signs of abuse from my own Instagram, like an image, and basically said, like, this is what helped me heal.
Really?
Yeah. About the signs of abuse. I'm like, oh, great. And, it's funny because you mentioned that earlier, like someone says you're abusive. They're like, no, you are. And it's like, here he was with my own evidence.
Yeah.
And he ended the email with, and what sucks is that you'll never have any clue of how much work I've done, how many apologies I have, how many realizations I've come to, wishes of things handled differently. The list goes on. And that's when I tried to reach out to you on your birthday. I finally felt like I was in a place that I could hopefully begin talking to you again. But it was clear that my time has passed and it's no one's fault but my own. And I own that. I wish I reached out sooner, but I didn't feel mentally prepared enough. But I don't care if you see this or read this. It's the last thing I'll ever say about this relationship. You'll never hear from me again. Still wish you the best.
Wow.
And of course, there was another email after that. So I blocked him. Yeah, I ended up blocking him after that because I was like, I'm not doing this. And then he wrote me from another email and wrote, and this is the last thing you'll ever hear from me. And I was just like, oh my God. Yeah. But it just showed me how much he didn't change. Like it was like clear as crystal. It was like, this is the same person I was dealing with.
That's hoovering you're talking about.
Yeah.
The term hoovering, they try to suck you back in. And it's so tricky sometimes because the abuser that actually is healing will have that sentiment. But what I teach is when you allow somebody, I mean, this is like love 101. When you let someone go, when you set them free and you let them be and you support their path, whether it's with you or away from you, that is the most loving, gifting thing you could ever do for someone. Like if you really are healing after you've hurt someone, you're going to support them going in whatever direction they want to go. And for them to come back and say, okay, I'll leave you alone because I respect your boundaries, and then come back and break that promise, that commitment, it shows, like you said, the gray area that I look at, like you said, it was manipulative. It's the same old tricks. And the gray area is I do think that some people that go into a healing space think that's the right thing to do, think that they've got it now, think they've figured it out, but they still haven't gotten to the point where the manipulation is still present. They haven't gotten to the point of removing that because it's still focused on you. Like if I give you enough information to make me look appealing, I believe you're going to come back to me. And so that's what it sounds like he did. He gave you enough information to sound like, hey, I've changed and all these stuff. And it's just too bad you're not going to, okay, I'm going to guilt trip you a little bit and I'm going to try to make your heart connect with me, try to access your heart or activate your heart so that you think about what you're losing. I'm going to throw all these dangling carrots in front of you to make me look appealing. And the healthy person is going to say, you know what, I'm so sorry for hurting you. I realize everything now. I wish you the best, happiest life ever. And then I'll let you go. And if you want to take that and contact them back, that's totally up to you. And if you want to run with it and say, great, leave me alone, I'm going to move on, that's great too. But all the power is in your hands, not theirs. So to take the power that your power, and just say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm going to block and move on. Even though it might hurt him, he should still support it if he's healed, if he is healing. If he's healed, he should support that. you know what? That was a good thing. It was a good thing for me. It was a good thing that my wife left. I'm so glad she left because it was the start of my healing and it got her out of the danger zone because I was hurtful. And it would be great if my wife tuned into my show one day, but I'm never going to reach out to her and say, hey, I've changed. Check me out. Because I want her to have a happy, loving life that without any interference or any coercion or manipulation or whatever she thinks, because she's moved on and I support that. And I think that's a healthy thing to do for her. Hopefully he's right. Hopefully he has changed, your ex. And if he has, then the next person that's with him is going to benefit from that. And he's going to benefit. And so if he hasn't, at least, you moved on and you don't have to worry about that anymore and you don't have to deal with that.
I saw in the other emails, like that anger that went back and forth. I sort of was able to see that he didn't really change, but the part that stuck out to me the most was when I'm sorry, I'll apologize without needing a response back. Like when I'm really sorry, and it comes from a place of like, I'm so sorry that I hurt you, or like, I'm sorry that this got, misconstrued. It's never like, now you don't get to hear sorry. It's like, if you were really sorry, you would have said sorry. You wouldn't have said any of that.
I didn't even catch that when you read that. You're right.
Yeah.
Now you're not going to hear, how sorry I am. Oh, okay. What do I do with that?
Or even like realizations, right? Like if this email said like, I understand and I am really, I've had a lot of realizations about my behavior and I'm working actively to change them, for the better. I understand you don't want to talk to me, but you've really opened my eyes or something like that. I think I would have like the final, conversation, it wouldn't have been as hurtful, like I ended up blocking him because I was like, I just feel like I'm back in this cycle and I don't want this,
Yeah. That old trauma bond starting to kick in like PTSD, reminding you, hey, this is something that you might like, that drug. You want that drug again. No, I don't want that drug again. I'll never do that drug. Love addiction anymore. Getting away from that.
And I was like actively struggling to like understand what a healthy relationship is, which I know is like a bit much bigger topic that we probably don't have time to get into, but that's what somebody was trying to pursue me that was like so nice and so caring. And he is my boyfriend now. But at the time he was being so understanding and I was like having PTSD all the time, like of what, like I couldn't even ask for what I needed. I couldn't cancel a plan. I couldn't say, without like going into a reaction. And I mean, even 8 months in, sometimes it still comes up, but I had that going on while like, the ex reached out and I was like, no, I can't handle all these feelings. Like I rather stay in the healthy stretch over here and not even think about this one.
That's lovely to hear that you are in a healthy relationship. That's great.
Yeah, it's probably my first one, but that's okay. That's okay. Paul, I have loved talking to you today. I really appreciate you coming on. I think that this is going to be so helpful for so many people. Can you share with me or with us, like how the offerings that you have and how people can connect with you?
Certainly. Thank you for having me on. I've had a wonderful conversation with you. Even though it's a hard topic, I absolutely sympathize and empathize with people out there that are dealing with this, that are listening to this, that are going through this, but it is very difficult. And yes, I do have a couple resources. You mentioned the Mean Workbook. If you go to loveandabuse.com, you don't have to purchase the Mean Workbook. You actually can listen to the podcast, and I cover almost everything in the podcast as well. The Mean Workbook helps you pretty much analyze your relationship and assess exactly, it pinpoints exactly what's going on in the relationship to just give you the data you need to understand that you're not going crazy and there is something happening here, and it defines what is happening. So it does help you in that respect. That's loveandabuse.com for both the workbook and the podcast. And of course, the overwhelmedbrain.com. I talked about the episode on obsession. If you're dealing with any kind of trauma bond, I do talk about that in both podcasts, but I definitely recommend looking up obsession at the overwhelmedbrain.com if you feel like you just can't get them out of your head. That can be helpful because I have a lot of tips doing that. But the Overwhelm Brain I've been doing for about 9 years. And that is really about personal growth and development and developing your boundaries and your values and trying to avoid or deal with toxic relationships. So there's a lot of variety in that show, but Love and Abuse, it deals with very difficult or manipulative or coercive relationships in case you want to or need to deal with that yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. And I'll include all those links in the show notes.
Great. Thank you, Jessica.
All right. Thanks, Paul. That was a long one, but I know that there were so many good pieces of information in there. I really appreciate Paul for coming on and sharing so much with us and also having such an in-depth knowledge of the mind of the abuser. When I say that listening to his podcast, Love and Abuse, changed my life and changed the way I was seeing abuse, I really, really mean it. It helped me understand things and covert ways that I was being emotionally abused that I don't think I would have seen or other people would have seen. I used to take the train to bring my daughter to preschool so I could walk home and listen to it. It became a very important part of my day, and it also a very important part of my healing. And so it sounds like I owe you an episode about the dog next week, but I will put all the information about Paul in the show notes and how you can find his podcast. And I'd love to hear from you. So if anything has come up in this podcast that's really sticking out to you, please feel free to DM me on Instagram at Emotional Abuse Coach or email me jessica@jessicaknightcoaching.com. And you can visit me at emotionalabusecoach.com. Thank you.